Quite a story, the Olympic story, huh? Fascinating. I personally did not know. I'm not a Utahn. Obviously, it was a spectacular games, and I remember that about it, but it's really interesting to hear behind-the-scenes stories. I'm sorry to have to follow that story, as a matter of fact. But I wanted to let you know that I'm grateful to be here today, and I've been working with various agencies across Utah for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's something that has been enormously rewarding for me, and I've learned a lot from my interactions with the folks in state government here in Utah, and I've been inspired by the things you're doing, and it's wonderful to come back here and just see how big it's become, how remarkable it's become what you're doing, and I just love to hear Kristen and Fraser and Governor Herbert talk because they have such a big picture in mind, and it's wonderful and inspirational to be a part of that. We're going to start to go down into some of the more I don't know, practical isn't quite the right word, but to more of the operating level, and how do we start to make more and more of this vision a reality in our organizations. And I like this term, what good looks like. I believe that it fits the way we want to see our organizations and our lives. It's easy to say what's wrong with the way things are. If we did that, we'd have no end of things that we can do. But that's often very demotivating, puts us into all kinds of finger pointing and disagreement with each other. I think the common ground that really will move us all forward is to focus on what good looks like. What are we after? What do we want to be? And whenever I talk to government organizations, I always have to start with the context because I think it is unique. And one of those unique aspects is the goal. If you're working in the private sector, if you're a company that's listed on Wall Street, the goal's very clear, right? All the measurements are well agreed on. Everybody knows what we're trying to do. What's the goal of government? Not so clear, is it? It creates a unique challenge for us. How do we move forward if we don't know the goal? You know the Alice in Wonderland story, right? Alice meets the white rabbit at the crossroads with all the signs, asks, which way should I go? The rabbit asks where she wants to go. She says, I don't know. And of course the rabbit says, well then any road will get you there. So if you don't have a goal in mind, if you don't have a clear direction, it's very hard to get there. Another challenge, obviously, is people are overloaded in government. Kristen talked about the gap between revenues and demand, and that it's growing year after year. Do you guys feel that in your operations? Do your people feel it? The other thing that I think is unique to the challenge of improving in government is how much you're scrutinized. Government, I give the example of, if you think about how many times do you read in the newspaper or see on the news or something a positive story about what's right with government? Yeah. Have you heard any of the negative stories that are out there? Dozens every day, right? This is one of the most highly scrutinized types of organizations around. And that has a very paralyzing effect. Would you agree? We start to become afraid of making a mistake instead of doing something great. And that's one of the biggest challenges. And I believe that as you get into changing an organization, the hardest part is starting. So overcoming some of these things and getting started, these are the kinds of challenges you face, I believe. Do you agree, by the way? I know there's many more, but these are relevant. Another question is, what is improvement? You've got your little part of the government here in the center. Now, who is out there telling you what improvement means? More than a few parties, right? Some of those kind of folks. How easy is it to serve many masters? Yeah, that's another challenge that we have, okay? Eyes are on us. Everybody's out there telling us what we should or shouldn't do, how we should operate, what's wrong, why we're failing, etc. Okay? This is the climate, I believe, and there's many other factors, but to me, these are the things that make it the most difficult to try to change government. Communication matters. As we get into these things, I believe very strongly that how you present anything has a significant impact on your ability to change the organization, on ability to get people to participate or not participate. Think about some of the things. Have you ever heard this? We must improve. Okay? What do people hear when somebody says, you must improve? Who said that? You looking at my slides ahead of time here? You're not good enough. Or what about this one? Have you heard this one before? Do more with less. Sorry for swearing. What about this one? We must reduce waste. This is my favorite because it's something we hear a lot related to government. And from a political standpoint, it's got to be about the easiest thing to sign up for. I'm a politician and I'm against waste in government. Well, duh. And I'm so, I think one of the situations you have here in Utah is you do have remarkable leadership. You have leadership that realizes this. They don't talk about you are wasteful. Utah ranks so high on all the metrics and evaluations of states, and yet here you are. Here you are trying to get better, seeking out solutions and strategies to take Utah forward even further, okay? That's a product of how people communicate within Utah, and it's very important. What do we hear when we say we must reduce waste? Is this what you think of me? I'm sitting around all day filing my nails instead of processing my inbox? So as we move forward, I believe very strongly in this message of let's focus on what we want. Let's focus on what we want to be. You may not know it, but this is not a new challenge. The challenge of overcoming resistance to change, of creating change in organizations. I did some research and I found this video from the Middle Ages. It's about a couple of monks in a monastery and trying to come to grips with a new technology that the monastery has launched. I'd like you to just listen to it. It's in Danish, so unless you speak Danish, read the subtitles. Worked before.
Broder Ansgar?
Ja.
Det er deg, ja?
Ja.
Så bra, ok.
Ja, hei du.
Da fatter jeg det.
Hei du. Ja.
Ja, hva gjelder det?
Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte?
Takk.
Ja.
Jaha?
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddag.
Ok, nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang. Vet du.
Ja.
Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller?
Nei, den bare ligger der.
Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Ja, åpne den, altså hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei, det er sant.
Nei. Vil du ha en kopp varmt vann?
Nei, da, det skal være fort gjort. Det
Ja.
skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er du i gang.
Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Ikke sant? Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Ja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her, så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark, på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså.
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen, tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der, så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde i stad. Ikke noe
Ok, så den
forandret.
slutter der, og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, da ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå,
Nei,
altså.
alt ligger lagret inni her nå,
Ja.
når du i tilfelle setter fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at ikke sant, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk. Ja, ja, det går til litt.
Det er greit.
Ja, men du, en til før det går. Jeg kan bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja,
sånn,
ja, riktig.
og så, hva du kalte det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, bla videre.
blar frem og tilbake.
Ja,
Og når,
teksten ligger der hele tiden.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Oi.
Flott.
Fint det.
Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, det er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det,
Ja,
altså?
du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den oppe.
Ja vel.
Har du
Ok.
lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Jeg skal følge med som manualen som brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Å ja,
Inni
den,
der
ja.
står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Åpnet den.
Ok, det skulle du kanskje ha tenkt på.
So yes, change is not easy, okay? Change is not easy, but we have to find a way through it. I thought that was a fun one. You know about the success framework, and so what I want to talk about today is primarily create your strategy, the first C. But you'll see I am touching on the first two parts of this as well. So the first step, and we'll go through these in some detail, is you have to define the goal of your system, okay? What is the throughput? What are we trying to accomplish? This may be clear, may not be clear, but it needs to be clear either way. The second step is to understand the system, okay? Fraser Bullock just talked about the importance of understanding the system. And I'm going to talk about two different kinds of throughput. I'm going to talk about simple throughput, which might be things like permits or benefits distribution or bridges built. And I'm going to talk about complex throughput, where it's not so clear how to achieve it. And there's much more at work than a simple process that we all can understand and follow. Things like education or recidivism or health. Once you have a picture of the system, we have to define the measurements. Measurements are critical if we're going to get better, faster, cheaper. Define what good looks like for the process. So in other words, if we're going to drive our organization forward, it helps to have a roadmap. It helps to have a template. This is how it should be. This is how we want it to be. When I have that, it's more than a vision. It's a vision down to the operational level. And then the last part, focus efforts. Kristen talked extensively about this morning. And I believe that this, and if you went to the multitasking talk earlier that's going on in another room right now, there's so much evidence on the power of focus, and we'll add a little more to that in a minute here. So let's start with define the goal. Ken Miller, who's also speaking in another room right now, talks about government as noble work. Do you agree? How many of you went into government for the money? Yeah, you see, you're smarter than that, because if you wanted the money, you wouldn't have gone into government, right? You went into government probably with some aspirations to have an impact, to help people, to improve things. Sometimes we do it because we're mad about the way something is and we want to see it changed or better. Do you believe that every government system exists for a reason? It may not be a good reason, but there's a reason, right? Can we define the reason? Why do we have payroll benefits? Why do we have SNAP? Why do we have a judicial system? It doesn't matter, right? We can come up with the reasons. So we can define the goal. And given that most government employees are purpose-driven, they're in government for the purpose of doing some good, defining the goal and focusing our efforts on the goal aligns perfectly with the people who work in government. It's something we can get behind, and that's important. Because if we're going to change our organizations for the better, whether we're at the top and we want to go further or at the bottom and we want to get better, it doesn't matter to me. We need to get people aligned. And oftentimes, simply articulating and communicating the purpose triggers improvement. Sometimes it's not so clear to people. So when they understand, you can get significant results just from that step alone. Where do you go to get the purpose of the organization? Well, the statutes might have them, the governor might have them in the executive branch, the customers certainly have them. Do you agree we can find what the purpose of every system within government is? Okay, so we can define the goal. Throughput, this term you've heard quite a bit about probably, is simply the output. How we measure the output of that goal. Once we've defined the goal, the next step is understand the system. Exactly what Fraser Bullock just said. And I'm going to recommend that you understand it first at a high level, because we want to see the whole. Has anybody ever done an exercise to map a system? Okay, over the years I've seen many organizations, government, non-government, where they've done these in-depth analyses of their organization, spread some long strips of butcher paper on the wall, get a bunch of yellow stickies, and map the whole flow. Okay? Stand back and you can see this picture of yellow stickies. But even though you can see the whole, you can't see the whole at all. Does it make sense? Because we have this big, overly detailed picture, and it's really hard to understand how all the pieces really fit together. So my suggestion always is start with a simple picture. You can always dive deeper. But when we're talking about improving a system, the first step is understand the whole. From customer through all the steps to throughput. And we recommend 1 page of paper. See the whole. Any one of those can then be exploded into more and more detail, but this gives us a simple overview of the whole, of how all those pieces fit together. The beauty of it is, too often people don't understand the whole. We work every day in our local reality. I'm answering phones, I'm filling out these forms, I'm interacting with the public, I'm back here crunching numbers. And we don't understand fully how our actions impact the other parts of the system or how we contribute to the throughput of the whole. And just a really technical thing, when you think about these steps, think about why you do them, not what you do. I don't do a phone interview. What I'm really trying to do is collect all the needed info. Do you understand the difference and why we want to be purpose-driven in terms of defining our steps? So there's lots more resources on this available through GOMB and other things that are out there. So now we have our goal, we've defined our system, high level, we can blow it down into lower level. The next thing is measurement, okay? Measurements tell us what works and what doesn't. Do you agree? If I get the right measurement, very good. And if I don't get the right measurement, it tells us something. Maybe nothing. Okay? But the purpose of one of the purposes of measurements is to know what's working and what's not. Do you agree? It's like a scoreboard. If I don't have a scoreboard in a game, it's very hard to know, are we winning? Are we succeeding? Are we getting ahead? Or are we falling behind? Another key role of measurements that's often overlooked is that measurements drive behavior. Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. Do you agree? Thank you. Okay, measurements drive behavior. And so when we put measurements in place, it's critical that we don't just look at what they tell us, but we have to look at what impact they have on people and what decisions they make. Measurements are one of management's most important tools because they drive behavior, because they give them feedback on the performance of their system. They can be a double-edged sword. If they're the wrong measurements, they tell us the wrong information and they drive the wrong behavior. If they're the right information, there's less and less that management that we have to do to drive performance. Yes?
Like recently with the Veterans Hospital and trying to increase the hospital, the bonuses of management.
Exactly. Perfect. And they game the system. And I have stories, and I'm sure all of us have stories of how organizations have looked good based on their metrics and done, in many cases, exactly the wrong things. So it's critical we understand the relationship between measurements and behavior. We have two kinds of measurements. We have system-level measures that give us outcomes, things like the QT over OE that you know. Q to give us the quality component, throughput to give us the volume component, and operating expense to give us the cost efficiency, cost effectiveness of the work that we're doing. Now, is this measurement perfect? Far from it. I don't know of any single measurement that describes all of the most important things in any system, okay? They are by their nature simplifications. But simplifications are also very useful to us because they help us make general analysis and see general trends. Another aspect, of course, is the operational measures, which are going to be more and more specific to your system. Let me talk for a minute about complex throughput. You know, problems like crime and recidivism, homelessness, housing, education, even things like, you know, I got to work with the ag folks a little bit. Even, is anybody here from the Department of Ag? Okay. Even things like treating weeds, right? It's complex throughput because there's so many factors that determine what the weed situation is. Okay? It's not just whether if we spray, they die. If we don't spray, they don't. There's so many other factors. So complex throughput isn't just big social problems. Okay? Does anybody here besides the ag guys work in a world in an environment that has complex throughput? Okay, good. Lots of you. So here the issue, and it was great what Fraser said about learning and the need to focus our efforts on learning. We've all heard this term, evidence-based approaches. What's an evidence-based approach? It's simply a method that has been tried in a rigorous and repetitive way so that we have some consistency in what was implemented and has been carefully measured and documented. Okay? If you will, it's a scientific experiment that was done. with documented evidence. So it doesn't mean it's perfect, just as no scientific experiment is perfect. But it means there's evidence to support that if you do X, you get Y. We need these things, and measurements are critical here. Bill Gates, a few years ago, in his foundation letter, wrote, "We need better measurement tools to determine which approaches work and which do not." And he was referring specifically to some large global health initiatives that they had going on. Even just something as simple as saying, vaccinating people against a disease is an evidence-based approach. Would you agree? People have studied if you vaccinate people, then the chance of them getting the disease is much lower. But there's a whole host of other things. Does the vaccine actually get to the communities that need it? Does it actually get injected into the people? Does it need to be injected 3 times over a 2-week period, and is that getting done? And as they've forced more and more measurement into this process, they've seen where the gaps are. Because it's too easy to say, well, we threw $2 billion at this and we pushed all these vaccines out, and look, the disease rate is just as high as before. And then what do? We throw the baby out with the bathwater. And for those of you who work in these kinds of environments, would you agree that the solutions are not simple, are not unilateral? They're very complex and often involve many factors. So complex throughput is a unique challenge, and it poses a significant challenge for measurement because of this conflict. We want to have effective measurements. One aspect of effective measurement is that we focus on accomplishing the larger goals. Would you agree? We want to improve education. We want to reduce recidivism. We want to improve grazing lands. These are ambitious goals. Let's do them. Let's not shy away from that. We heard that from Governor Herbert. We heard it from Fraser. We heard it from Kristen Cox. That means we should measure people on the ultimate outcomes. Agreed? But there's another side to this. In order to have an effective measurement, we should also measure people based on things they can control. It's kind of silly to measure me on the weather in South Africa, right? I have no control over it. Useless to have a measurement there. Who knows what I'm going to do, and it's certainly not going to have any impact. Which says what? Don't measure people based on outcomes. Because they don't really control whether our students are getting better grades or better scores or better prepared for the world. Because there's so many factors. Has anybody experienced this conflict before? Man, we want to go after the big prize, but how do we measure people so that we don't demotivate them? Okay? What's the solution? This is a huge problem. We don't have time to go into it in a lot of depth, but let me just say this. The key to the solution is understanding that what we need to do is measure the approach based on the outcome and measure people based on the things they can control. Let me say it again. Measure the approach based on the outcome, right? We say, we're going to try this because it seems to have some impact on improving this important objective. So we measure whether that approach got the objective or not. And we measure people on how well they executed the approach, because that's what they can control. And it breaks this conflict between how we measure people. And of course, if you're in complex throughput, the key thing is that we get fast feedback. Let's say we make a child, the penal system's a good example, okay? let's say we make a change in how we are trying to rehabilitate people who are in prison today. How long will it be till we know if there's any impact on recidivism from those actions? A year, I guess it'd be much more than a year. That would be like the absolute minimum, right? So what do? Launch a new approach, wait 5 years, and then go, no, that didn't work. That doesn't feel right, does it? Especially when we're getting scrutinized by so many parties for looking for any mistake that we might make. That's why it's critical to get fast feedback. Do you guys have these radar signs? And I see somebody from the sheriff's back, the state troopers back there. Okay, we don't always know what will work. So we have to have fast feedback. Sometimes it takes a long time. So we can't measure recidivism. Just like with the vaccines, the healthcare workers can't measure whether the incidences of the disease is going down for a long period of time. But they can measure how many people have been vaccinated. They can measure how many people received the full course of the vaccine. They can measure how many vaccines got to the most affected areas. Okay? So they have ways to measure interim impact. Is it great? No. As Bill Gates said, we need better and better measurements here. Okay? The nice thing about having fast feedback, though, is it works the other way also. Even when you have simple throughput. If people can see, I took this action, and in short order they can see that we've moved the needle, we've made things better, that creates a positive reinforcing loop. We tried it, it works. We tried it, it doesn't work. Let's analyze why. We modified it, now it works. We analyzed it and we got rid of it entirely and we tried something else. If we take this learning approach, Fraser said it, I'm going to echo it. If we take this type of learning approach, we start to remove this fear of moving that we have in government because we're under such scrutiny. Try it, measure it, and move on. So let's put this together. And as we start to talk about it in terms of a strategy, I just want to give you some guidelines that may help you, some ways to think about it, because your organizations are complex. And one of the most difficult questions that everybody faces is, where do we start? How do we start? And I think this is one of the most important questions. And it's not always asked, both in the private sector and in the public sector. What limits our throughput? Throughput is what we do. That's our purpose. Why is it important to know what limits it? Gee, if we don't know what limits it, how do we know how to improve it? The insights of Ellie Goldratt that Kristen referred to in Theory of Constraints, very simple. You have a system. Every system has a weakest link. Agreed? That's what limits its throughput. That's what limits the strength of any chain. So if you want to improve any system, if you want to make your system stronger, if you want more throughput, what must be the first step? Find the weakest link, right? Find the weakest link. Okay? Maybe it's through measurements, but oftentimes there's other empirical ways of doing it. We say identify the constraint. That's what Goldratt said. Now I found it. Here's the weakest link, that little link in the chain, that little wire link in our big fat chain. What's my next step? I got to improve it, right? I got to fix it. And we always start with squeeze the most out of what you have. Don't go out and buy more. That's not the first step. Squeeze the most out of what you have. It might be that there's significant amounts of capacity that are being left on the table because we didn't understand that this was the real limiting factor. So get the most out of it. Now, what's the role of the other links in the system? What should they do? In my little funky little pipe here, if I'm green or yellow, what's my role? Do as much as I can? What if I do as much as I can? What's going to happen? It's just going to bottleneck in front of the red part of the chain here, right? Beautiful. Something like that. They need to support the weakest link, help the weakest link, take actions that enable the weakest link to do more. Okay? We say subordinate to the weakest link, the constraint. As we improve, as we get more and more improvement out of the constraint, we strengthen it. What's eventually going to happen? Something else becomes the weakest link, right? So we want to go back and find the new one. It's a very simple common sense process. When I go to companies, about half of my work is public sector, half is private sector. When I go to companies, I ask them, where's your constraint? And I get one of two answers. One is, we don't know. Okay? The other answer is, we disagree. The management team each thinks it's in a different place. Either way, the problem is the same. If we don't agree on where our weakest link is, on what limits our organization, it means by definition, we're not focused on improving it. Would you agree? So if your organization, not just at the top, but all the way through the organization, doesn't know where the constraint is, it means we have opportunities. It means we have opportunities to get much, much better. I'm not even going to tell this story, but the joke I'll tell is you guys usually get told that you need to do things like business does, right? Government needs to be more like business. Well, my story is how this division of HP spent 9 months analyzing where their constraint was. And they couldn't agree on it. And they said, we're stuck. We believe in these 5 steps. We know it's the right thing for us to do, but we don't know where to start because we can't agree on the constraint. And I said, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? I said, well, we could pick the wrong one. I said, okay, let's say I picked the wrong one. Instead of that red one that was real narrow, I picked the green one. What would happen if you implemented the process? How long would it take you to find out that you'd made a mistake? 2 engineers got together. Come back. Somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. I love engineers, right? Okay, 6 and 9 hours, and they spent 9 months debating it. Okay? So don't be like HP, all right? Be better than business. Don't be like business. Let's go further with it. What good looks like. Taking these 5 steps, I believe, is a huge crutch for us to lean on. Okay? The work that Goldratt did in terms of understanding very complex systems and breaking them down into those 5 common sense steps enables us to have a template for creating a strategy. Now, before I go into what do I mean by a strategy? In my 20, 25 years of consulting, I've seen a whole range of things that people called strategy. Everything from things that sounded more like mission statements or vision statements that were very general and broad and high level and were motherhood and apple pie, to things that were highly detailed and scripted and situation specific that, you know, looked more like a 3-inch process manual. When I say an operating strategy, what I'm talking about is we have a system, which means we have parts. An operating strategy outlines what the parts need to do in order to work effectively together to maximize our throughput, to achieve our goal. It's football season, right? So a football play. Look at, the X's and the O's and where the arrows are. It outlines the role every player is supposed to play to move the ball down the field. Governor Herbert gave us the example of the symphony, the Utah Symphony this morning. It's the same thing. Beautiful music doesn't come from all of the players playing as loud and as fast as they can, right? It comes from the coordination of their efforts. The score of the symphony is the strategy. Okay? A military battle plan is another good example. How all the parts are going to move and coordinate in order to accomplish our goal. And these 5 steps give us a way to create these strategies for our organizations. Okay? I look at it as it's a simple description of how we want things to work. It's the should be. Let me give you an example. Doctor's office. We've all been in doctor's offices, right? How do doctor's offices work? Well, first of all, what's the constraint in the doctor's office? The doctor, right? Absolutely. That's why it's in red. Here's the process step. The patient comes in, he gets checked in, we get his records, we get him prepped, he sees the doctor, gets diagnosed, maybe there's testing, checkout, etc. Okay? The doctor's the constraint. So what does that mean? Let's apply the 5 steps. What does good look like at the doctor? We should be squeezing the most out of the doctor's talents, right? The talents of diagnosing and treating so that she's always busy seeing patients. So the doctor should be spending more and more of their time diagnosing and treating. Do you agree? Now, what about the operations that support the doctor before and after? What's their role? What if I'm at the front end of the process here? Beautiful, making sure everything's ready, and we've seen it, right? What are some of the attributes of a doctor's office that illustrate that everything is directed towards supporting the doctor, diagnosing and treating? We got multiple exam rooms, right? So that patients are getting prepped while the doctor is seeing one. You know those little things that hang on the wall where they put the file folder, right? Here's the record, so you can see what's going on with the patient. We come in, we sit in a waiting room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Doctors have ready patients. Afterwards, we know once the doctor has seen them, the rest of the process should go quickly because we've moved through the constraint. Everything should be smooth. The quality should be high. A doctor's office operates using these common sense principles of constraints. Let's talk about it in more how-to terms. So you've created this simple map of your organization or of a process in your organization. The first step is don't be HP. Don't try to find your constraint. Choose where you want it to be. Why should the doctor be the constraint in the doctor's office? It's the most expensive. It's the hardest to get more of. It's the scarcest commodity. Do you have commodities like that, skills like that, resources like that in your organization? Absolutely. That's where your constraint should be. Doesn't mean it necessarily is there now, but that's where we want it to be. Why? Because it's much easier to get the other skills and much less expensive to get the other skills to support that scarce skill. So decide where you want the constraint to be, then tell me what good looks like there. If I were to walk into your business and you said, that's the constraint, this operation does X, and what they should be doing is this, diagnosing and treating, or whatever it is. And they should be doing more and more and more of it. A good example is from Workforce Services in their adjudication department. The judges were the constraint. That's the scarcest resource. And one of the things that they found when they looked at what good looks like, the judges should be busy all of the time, was that oftentimes the judges had gaps where they were not hearing cases. They were not able to hear cases because one of the parties in the complaint didn't show up. And so that time was lost, and it would have to be rescheduled, and the backlog grew, and we didn't hear the cases. So somebody at the front end said, oh, our job is to keep the judges busy all the time? Well, you know, we have all these no-shows. Why don't we institute a policy where the parties have to call in 24 hours before the hearing to confirm that they're going to be there? Great little solution, came from the floor of the operation, and boom, the number of no-shows dropped dramatically. Didn't cost anybody anything. We didn't hire any more people. Nobody worked any harder, but we got a lot more throughput. So creating these simple pictures, using these steps, identify the constraint, select where you want it to be, decide how to exploit it, and describe what it means to support the constraint. Now we create a game plan, okay? A football play. And they're very general. It doesn't say all the details of how you do anything, because there may be many different ways to do things. What we want is people to understand what good looks like from a flow standpoint. Does it make sense? How am I doing on time here, Jeff? 10 more minutes? Okay. So I'm not going to go into this. You can read it, but focus, focus, focus. Okay? Focus, focus, focus. If you're not working on the weakest link in your system, if you're not working on your constraint, you're probably wasting efforts. You're probably not getting the impact you would like. This picture of what good looks like, this simple roadmap, sometimes it's called a TOS or throughput operating strategy. It gives us something to compare what we're doing to the results we're getting. And a good example, you've heard this term, I'm sure. How many have heard the blue light story? Okay, so the blue light story, I'll tell it since about half of the folks haven't. This comes from my first year as a consultant. I'd worked several years in industry. I was 25. I pretty much had it all figured out, so I decided I'd go into consulting. And one of my first clients was a large manufacturing company, and they sent me to one of their plants. And this plant made bumpers for trucks. Okay, big, heavy metal bumpers. You can picture them. They had a very clear bottleneck, and since we were the bottleneck guys, maybe we could help. They tried whatever they could, and the only solution they had left on the table was to knock down some walls, build more space on the plant, and hire a bunch more welders. And it was bad enough that that was going to cost a significant investment, but what was worse was it was going to not be a quick fix. It was going to take some time. And for a company that makes bumpers that has a huge bottleneck with a big backlog of stuff, they're in a situation where they're going to lose customers if they don't get a solution to this fast, because there's lots of choices to buy bumpers. So I went in with my brilliant 3 years of experience, and I approached the plant manager and I told him, sight unseen, there's at least 25% more capacity in your operation. Now, he had about 30 years of experience. He was near retirement. He knew 100 things that I'll never know. And he was very patient with me. He showed me all the reports that their efficiency was extraordinarily high. They were tops in their industry, all these kinds of things. And we go back and forth. And we're getting nowhere when he suggests, let's go and look. I'll take you out. You came all the way out here. I'll take you out on the floor and we'll go see the welding operation. So I was always taught, if you're going to go and look at anything and try and figure out what's going on, you have to have a picture of what should be happening, of what good looks like. So we're going to the welding department. You can tell what my picture was. Blue light. the blue light that comes from a welding torch, okay? If the torch isn't on, they're not welding, right? They need more welding. So we went and we watched, and I'll just give you a couple of quick examples of what we saw. First thing we see is a welder finishes welding, turns off his torch, takes off his gear, taps his buddy on the shoulder. He comes over, stops welding. They get and move these bumpers. They put a few more up on the work table. The guy goes back. The welder who got the new bumpers, he starts picking at them with his fingers. He's peeling some plastic off of the bumper that's there to keep it from getting scratched in other operations, but he's got to get it off to weld it. We see another guy over moving pallet after pallet of bumpers to get at the job that he needs to do next, and then moves the other ones back out of the aisle. A host of these kinds of things, so that after 20 minutes, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've totally sandbagged this guy. I told him 25% more capacity, there's this much blue light. I missed it by 1 or 2 zeros, literally. And fortunately though, before I can tell him all the things he should do to quickly solve this problem, he turns to me and he says, you see, they're busy all of the time. And I was just dumbstruck, fortunately, because my mouth closed. Here are 2 people looking at the same situation, and they're seeing it about as different as you can get. I'm seeing any number of easy opportunities to fix this, and he's seeing none at all. This issue of having a clear picture of what good looks like is so powerful. Don't be fooled by its simplicity. These guys took it, they blew out the capacity. They hired a helper, somebody with a strong back to move bumpers, stage the parts, peel the plastic, etc. Within 3 weeks, the backlog that had been there for 9 months was gone. Okay? It's not rocket science. And I would encourage you, does anybody have a resource or an area that you are worried about as a bottleneck in your business? If you do this exercise. Define what the blue light is. What's the key skill? What's the key activity that only that resource can do? And then go and observe it. Go a couple times a day for a few days in a row and count how many times that resource is doing the blue light activity and how many times not. I think you will find that a significant percentage of the time, usually more than 50%, they are not doing the blue light activity, which means there is hidden capacity in your organization. People have done it. Texas has done it. There are all kinds of stories around Utah, so I picked some from outside of Utah. My favorite thing is we use this process, and there's more, but created the strategy and then implemented it. This is their WOTC. It's a paper, kind of process. An approval process is either a yes or a no. They were at 200 days of backlog. Within a few months, they'd cut it in half. I left the scene. They continued to use that picture of what good looks like and those 5 steps. They cut it to 38 on their own. It's now below 30 days, and it's been there for more than a year. Hawaii, another good example. They made same process, huge impact on their Department of Taxation, which was kind of the bane of the of state government. It was like the whipping boy. They were always called out as the worst department in state government. They reduced the returns that took more than 21 days to process by 80%. They did 38% more returns in the tax season with 20% fewer people. Basically, almost no temps. They used to hire lots of temps. Okay? And you can see what Senator David Iga, who was the head of the Ways and Means Committee at the time, said about it. Okay? He actually is likely to be the next governor of Hawaii, which is interesting. All right, so in conclusion, what you guys do is so important. It is noble work. I know that most of the time what you get for it is a kick in the teeth, okay? But there are ways to overcome the obstacles. Your colleagues are doing it, you've probably done it, and the more that we can share those things with each other, the more that we can lean on some simple, repetitive processes so that we don't have to do 75 things to start to get results. Clarify your purpose. Emphasize what good looks like, not what's wrong with things. Measures are essential. Be careful with them, but use them. Simple pictures. Simple pictures. A picture's worth 1,000 words. I think it's worth, billions of dollars. And most important, remember what Newton said. Objects in motion tend to remain in motion. The hardest time in any improvement initiative is when you start, because you're trying to move an organization that is going one direction in a different. And the inertia is the hardest thing to overcome. So do anything you can to create momentum. Get a success. Get a small gain. Get a few people on board. The momentum is everything. Lastly, I want to thank you for all that you do and for taking the time to be here today. Being here was absolutely your choice, and I applaud you for doing everything you can to try to improve the service that the great service you already give to the taxpayers of Utah. And I just want you to know that the impact that you guys have and what you're doing here goes far beyond this room, far beyond the borders of Utah. There are countries, the story Kristen told, or that the governor told about Japan, there are European countries, there are people who have come and seen the stories of what you guys have done from all over the world, and they're taking your stories back to their countries. The impact you're having is far bigger than you realize, probably far bigger than any of us realize. So thank you for that, and I look forward to hearing about the next waves of successes. Thank you very much.